particularly
y a las
surrounding the
tensiones
logistics of the day
institucionales.
and institutional
Hoy
tensions.
volvemos a reunirnos porque casi
Today,
3
we're
semanas
meeting again
después,
because nearly
Honduras
3
sigue sin
weeks later,
resultados definitivos
Honduras
y la
still does
etapa
not have
posterior a
definitive
la
results,
votación se ha
and
vuelto
the
cada vez más
post-voting
compleja
environment
y
has
delicada.
become increasingly
A la fecha
complex
se
and
está
sensitive.
finalizando el conteo
And to
especial de más
date,
de
the special count of more than
2.700 actas con
2,700 tally
inconsistencias.
sheets
Este
that contain
proceso
inconsistencies has faced
clave para
significant
avanzar en el
delays.
reconocimiento
And
de
this
los
process is
resultados
key to
no se
advancing in
inició
recognition of the
en la
result.
fecha prevista
But it did
debido
not
a
begin
acusaciones
on
de
the scheduled
fraude
date due
presentadas por
to
los partidos
accusations of
Libre
fraud
y Liberal
lodged
que no
by the
enviaron a sus representantes para dar
neither of
inicio
which
al
sent
proceso.
their representatives to
Ante el
begin the
retraso,
count.
el miércoles 17 de
And
diciembre
in
en
light of the
Washington,
delay on
la
Wednesday,
Oficina de
December 17th
Asuntos
in
del
Washington,
Hemisferio Occidental
the State
del Departamento del
Department's
Estado
Bureau of Western
emitió un
Hemisphere
comunicado
Affairs
exhortando
issued a
a que se
statement
avanza con el
urging
proceso y
Honduras to
advirtiendo
move
que
forward with the
cualquier
process,
obstáculo
also
al mismo podría
warning that
tener
any
consecuencias.
hindrances to the process
En
could
los
have
últimos días,
consequences.
además, hemos visto protestas
Over the last
en las
few
calles de
days, we have
Honduras.
seen
Todo
protests in the
esto,
streets of
sin duda,
Honduras.
tiene implicaciones muy
And
importantes
all
para
of
la
this
confianza en
undoubtedly
las
has
instituciones
very important
electorales
implications when
y
it
en el
comes to
propio
trust
proceso,
in electoral
especialmente considerando que
institutions and in
según
the
el
process
calendario
itself,
electoral, el
especially
Consejo
considering
Nacional
that the
Electoral debería
election calendar
acreditar
calls for the National
oficialmente
Electoral
los
Council, the
resultados
CNE,
antes
to officially
del 30
certify the
de
results
diciembre.
before
Cómo se manejan esas tensiones y
the
cómo
way
continúe
these tensions
desvolviéndose
are
el proceso en las
handled and
próximas
how the
semanas
process
será clave
continues to
para la
unfold in the coming
estabilidad
weeks will
democrática
be
del
key
país.
for the democratic
Para ayudarnos a
stability
entender
of
qué está en
Honduras.
juego en
To
esta
help us to
etapa,
understand what
qué
is at
dice la ley,
stake in this
cuáles son
stage,
los
what
escenarios
the law
posibles
says,
y
what the
qué
possible
implicaciones
scenarios
tienen las
are,
dinámicas
as well
políticas
as
y
what
sociales
the
actuales.
implications of the current
Hoy
political and
contamos
social
con un
dynamics
panel
are,
increíble
we are
de
joined today
expertos.
by an incredible
Nos
panel of
acompaña
experts.
Héctor Corrales.
First, we have
Héctor es un
Héctor
analista
Corrales.
político y
He is a
director de
political
Nodo, un
analyst and the director
laboratorio
of
de
Nodo,
investigación
an
independiente que estudia
independent
el
research
poder, las
laboratory
narrativas
that
y
studies
los datos
power,
que modelan la política, la
rhetoric, and the
economía y la
data
sociedad
and
en
data that shape
Honduras.
politics, the economy,
También Jennifer
and the
Avila,
society in Honduras. We are
cofundadora
also joined
y
by
directora
Jennifer
editorial del
Avila,
medio
co-founder and editor
digital Contracorriente. Ella cuenta con más de una
Contracorriente.
década de experiencia como
Jennifer has more than
reportera,
10 years
documentalista
experience as a
y editora
reporter,
en Honduras y
documentary
además hace 5
filmmaker, and
años
editor in
la Latin
Honduras.
American Studies
And 5
Association
years ago,
le
the Latin
otorgó
American
el
Studies
Media Award
Association
por su
awarded her
aporte a la
the Media
investigación
Award for
periodística
her
en la
contributions to
región.
investigative journalism in
También
the
Sandra
region.
Ponce, abogada y
We also
defensora
have Sandra
de derechos
Ponce, a
humanos,
lawyer and
con
human
una
rights
amplia
defender.
trayectoria
She has
como
an
ex
extensive
fiscal
career
de
as
derechos
a
humanos
former
y como
human rights
diplomática
prosecutor,
y
as
funcionaria
well as
en
a
las
diplomat
oficinas
and
de
official
Naciones Unidas
in
en Ginebra y
the
Viena.
United Nations
Y
offices in both
finalmente,
Geneva and
César
Vienna.
Espinal, abogado
Lastly, we
y
have Cesar
coordinador del
Espinal.
Observatorio
He
de
is an
Política
attorney and
Criminal
coordinator of the
Anticorrupción del
Anti-Corruption
Consejo Nacional
Criminal Policy
Anticorrupción,
Observatory
la
of the
cual es una
National
organización de la
Anti-Corruption
sociedad
Council.
civil que
This is a
trabaja para
civil society
prevenir,
organization that
investigar
works
y
to
combatir la
prevent,
corrupción, promoviendo
investigate,
la
and combat
transparencia y
corruption,
la rendición de cuentas en el sector público.
transparency, and accountability in the
También,
public
sin
sector.
duda, es un panel
This
excepcional
is an
y este
exceptional
panel va a estar
panel.
en conversación con María Fernanda
Maria
Bosmosky,
Fernandez
directora y líder
Bosmosky
para
will
Centroamérica en
moderate.
el
She is
Centro
our
Adrienne Arsht
director
para América
and
Latina.
leader for
Ella
Central
va a
America at
moderar
the
este
Adrienne
diálogo y
Arsht
sin
Latin
más, María
America Center.
Fernanda, te cedo la palabra
So,
para dar
without further
inicio
ado,
a
Maria
la
Fernanda,
conversación.
I yield the floor to you so that you can
Muchas
get us
gracias,
started.
Jason. Gracias
Thank
a
you very
todos los
much,
que
Jason,
se
and
están
thank you
uniendo
to
a
all
este
of you
evento
joining
virtual
us
que estamos
this
sosteniendo desde
virtual
el Centro para
event.
América Latina del Atlantic
We
Council,
are
casi
coming
a
to
3
you from
semanas de
ALAC,
que los y las
approximately
hondureños fueron
3
a las
weeks
urnas a
after
elegir al
the
próximo presidente del
Honduran
país,
people
al
turned
Congreso
out to
con
the polls to
128
elect
curules
their
y las distintas
new
alcaldías.
president,
Sin más,
128 seats in
quisiera
Congress,
primero
as
invitar al
well as some
público a mandarnos
mayorships.
sus preguntas. Tenemos una
To
página
send
web
some questions with
askac.org. El equipo va a estar filtrando
askac.org,
sus
and the
preguntas y yo las estaré
team
recibiendo.
will be
Pero
screening your questions
déjenme
as they come
arrancar la
in.
conversación,
Let
Héctor,
me
con
get
vos. Quisiera
started with
que nos
Hector.
ayudes a contextualizar dónde
Hector, can
estamos
you
hoy,
help
19
provide us with some
de
context
diciembre.
as where things
¿Qué está
stand today
pasando?
on December
¿Qué tiene que
19th?
pasar en los
What's
próximos días
happening?
para
What will happen to
para que
have to
se
happen
cumpla
in the
con
coming
el proceso
days
electoral?
to
Adelante, Héctor.
meet the requirements of the election
Gracias, María
process?
Fernanda, y
Thank you
gracias,
very much, Maria
Jason. Un gusto
Fernanda.
estar
Thank you, Jason.
con ustedes
I'm
y
very
con los
pleased to
compañeros
be with
panelistas.
you and with my fellow
Bueno, creo que
panelists.
comenzando desde adelante hacia atrás, porque sí creo que es importante ver también los antecedentes de dónde venimos, ¿no? Entonces, hoy estamos en un proceso de escrutinio especial a donde se está disputando el número de urnas que tienen que ir a escrutinio especial, con bastantes retos en echarlo a andar operativamente para que se dé de manera sencilla y simple como se debe dar, para que se pueda dar una declaratoria el 30 de diciembre, como lo mencionó Jason. Entonces, creo que para entender cómo llegamos acá a un nivel de tal conflictividad, el golpe a la confianza, el primer golpe a la confianza del proceso electoral se da en marzo, ya hace más de 9 meses, ¿no? En el que tenemos elecciones primarias, los mismos 3 consejeros que tenemos hoy, pero bajo unas Fuerzas Armadas, bajo la tutela de la ex ministra de Defensa, Rixi Moncada, que a la vez era la candidata, ¿no? Entonces, hay un caos logístico que se da durante las primarias, y eso golpea la confianza de la gente en general del proceso.
And this
Y desata un
undermined
conflicto
people's
institucional
trust
entre
in
las
the
Fuerzas
process.
Armadas
It
y el
led to
Consejo Nacional
institutional
Electoral,
conflicts between
especialmente
the
con
armed
las
forces and the
que forman parte de
CNE,
los
especially
partidos de
those
oposición, ¿verdad? Entonces,
representatives from the
comienza ese
opposition
conflicto y
parties.
después
So
comienza
these
la
conflicts
judicialización del proceso electoral, en el
had
que
their genesis
tanto el
there, and
Congreso
they spilled
Nacional
over into
interviene
the
nombrando una
elections.
comisión
And the
investigadora, el
Congress
consejero Marlon
put
Ochoa
together a
comienza a interponer
committee,
denuncias al
and
Ministerio Público,
Ochoa
y el Ministerio Público
filed a complaint with the public
comienza a
prosecutor's
hostigar a las
office, and they
consejeras de
started
oposición.
to harass some of the members of the council who represent the opposition. And then there was some disagreement on procedures in the CNE. And that's where one of the members of the council decided to withdraw from some of the meetings, and that led to delays in the election calendar. There are a few important things to understand. The physical side of the work at the CNE, the Libre Party, and then Richie Moncada, who said that she would not recognize the CNE as the ultimate arbiter in this. So that's how we got to where we are today, the actions of the Public Prosecution Ministry. And it's undermining, or its actions possibly undermining the CNE. In August, Cosette Lopez was interviewed on CNN, and she said that the harm into the operations didn't just happen to the electoral process. It was like having a gun pointed at the head of the CNE. So things moved on, but there are many saying that they will refuse to accept CNE's results. This is in the Libre Party. That's a little bit of the background when you ask me what's behind this, and that's what I have to say. Uh, and we hope that such disputes would not exist, but right now we have so little maneuvering room. But it may be that one party, the Liberal Party, will declare themselves the winner, but the Libre Party would be their proxy. Well, thank you for emphasizing the point that the challenges today m- didn't start just 3 weeks ago. They've been in the works for months. They've been fermenting, as it were. Jennifer, in a contracorriente, you've been very closely following what's happened over the course of this election year. Could you describe a bit the social environment today in Honduras over these past 3 weeks, the levels of trust or distrust, as it were, vis-a-vis CNE? What are your thoughts? And thank you very much. Thank you for your interest in the topic. I think these elections and the way the counting is going, and there's no official winner yet, what it showed us are two things. In the punishment vote against Libre, which is the current ruling party, that's something that's been made very clear, not just at the level of the president, but also in Congress. They've lost some seats, they've lost seats at other levels. It is a rejection of the Libre Party, the way they've been communicating, the way they've been governing over the past 4 years. And then we have fragmentation amongst the Honduran people. Our citizens are very divided, very polarized. And we may have been able to foresee this punishment and a return to a two-party system, something that was reconfigured after the 2021 elections and through partnerships between different parties. In that setting, and the national and the liberal parties reconfiguring themselves. We're seeing new faces, but also leaders who continue to wield a great deal of power, and we're going back to a more two-party system. I think everyone's a little bit tired, and they want it not just to be two parties, but bipartisan to make agreements. And so there are different segments of the three parties, not just some of the attacks from Libre, but it's also attacks on people. They bring us back to prior decades, the liberals, the nationalists who used to engage in a great deal of conflict. It's also important to underscore that people really did do their civic duty by turning out to vote. Now, the numbers weren't the same as 2021, but the turnout was quite high. People went to the polls. I think there's a lack of trust in political parties and their leadership and the way they've handled the elections. That's something that we've dragged on from the past. Hector was talking about the crisis during the primaries, the way that people responded to the crisis, people who went and turned out to vote. There were people waiting until midnight. They wanted to make sure they got their ballot in. That's the way they are trying to surmount the political parties boycott. The lack of trust came from the governing party with all of the processes, the accusations, the reports. We've had some recordings leaked, the accusations of fraud. At least in the results that we've seen thus far, people truly rejected this. But another point that really led to fragmentation of the votes, or the Donald Trump weighing in with his opinion, prior to the elections. I think if the country was already fragmented and divided and polarized, those messages also it started to weigh in on the votes. That's what I would say is our position from Contracorriente. Sandra, in these tensions we're seeing in Honduras, do you think that they stem from the public's lack of understanding, lack of eh, of understanding of electoral laws or election schedules, or how this work, or do you think it might be more a factor of political polarization, external factors, like what's happening on the streets of Honduras? Thank you. Thank you, Maria Fernanda, and thank you for the invitation to join this panel with my colleagues. I think that the public has very little to do in what we could describe as this tension. Citizens did their duty, as Jennifer noted. We saw that turnout was great. It wasn't as high as in the prior elections, but despite some of the issues with the process, I would say that turnout was very good. There were elections under a state of emergency, and there were 30,000 collectives who said that they were going to appear in the largest cities, but the people turned out. People trust in democracy in Honduras, and they wanted to do their part. I think it's more about the political actors. The OAS Permanent Council met to discuss the situation in Honduras for the second time. And the chief of the EOM in Honduras and the OAS Secretary General both stated that this crisis is not just electoral in nature, it's also due to po- polarization and politicization. And those who are some other actors who are involved. Hector went into detail about this. We're not talking about just the last 3 weeks. This is the culmination of many actions and polarization that is deep rooted and dates back several decades. People now are better aware. They are aware of politicization or the distribution of power with certainty that elections should and must be a reflection of popular will. And thank you very much, Sandra. Cesar, I want to bring you into our discussion. Switching gears a little bit, looking forward to December 30th. That's 11 days away, and we've got the holidays in between. What would have to happen for CNE to be able to officially certify the results by the deadline? I also wanted to know that, let's say that doesn't come to pass. They're not able to certify. Then what happens? Tell us a little bit. Well, good afternoon to my fellow panelists and to the organizers. I think the climate could lend itself to different scenarios, but the law does establish the next steps that the special count must come to a conclusion. They're going to have to resolve some of the inconsistencies and disputes and that exist. The discussion is happening every day. and this is having an impact that the public has about the elections. It worsens polarization, the divisions and crises we've already been seeing. And then the panelists before me spoke to this as well. This, we could continue to do this in an orderly fashion. CNE must be able to take all the steps necessary to address the challenges, those who are contesting the count, and they will be counting the votes to reach the threshold of certainty to ensure that the votes that the citizens cast last November 30th are recognized. They are going to have to be consistent with regulations in place. They're going to have to be transparent about. And I think it's been very positive that CNE has enabled observation and a platform where people can follow in real time what the logistics are. Now, once they resolve some of the challenges or the contested votes, that would lead to the ability to come up with an official statement. And again, it would have to be by the deadline. As long as they are transparent and open, it would help to prevent political actors from distorting this, which is what their objective has been in recent days. So I think it's also important to bear in mind, and this is perhaps the most difficult side of things, but those points that are legally established under law and are perhaps the most difficult objectives to meet. That is to reconcile political differences, and that translated into some of the weaknesses that the CNE is experiencing now. We have already heard that the representative of the current governing party made a decision on behalf of the party stating that will not sign off on the official certification. And this brings us to a legal crossroads in the crisis. For the resolution to do that, there has to be a vote in the plenary. There could be a scenario where the alternate would have to weigh in, but both alternates have already taken a position wherein they are aligned with the official ruling party. The CNE, where only a limited number of the plenary are involved. If that were to happen, it could be a 2 to 3, but it should be the plenary. So what happens if we fall into some sort of legal gap and the certification, it doesn't happen, and the 30th of December comes, then uncertainty and the political crisis will extend, and it will undermine the legitimacy of the process. So the National Congress would have to intervene. That will bring us to yet another crossroads. It's not the standing committee that would be able to make the decision to make the statement and certify the count. That would have to be an exceptional situation. There would have to be a special session of Congress called, and they they that you would have to have the plenary of Congress vote, and that could worsen the crisis. And through January 27th, where the law and talks about a government cabinet that it would have to meet, and that's one of the most extreme scenarios that could transpire. But again, these are very extreme uh, possibilities. We still have 11 days to complete the count, to resolve all of the inconsistencies and issues, and have the plenary of the CNE with and having already handled some of the rhetoric and what we're hearing from the different political forces to ensure that there's certainty behind the result. Hector, in terms of this possibility that you don't have the plenary of the CNE there to offer an official certification, what would be the most likely scenarios? And looking forward to December 30th, but also taking into account January 27th, when the transition would have to take. And Cesar shared some extreme scenarios, but what do you think, particularly if the representative of Libre doesn't take part? Well, there's something that Sandra said that I think is important to understand about our political, constitutional, and justice system. By design, it's politicized. And it's not just at the electoral level, but it's also at the level of our justice system. Well, Marlon Ochoa, he answers to the Libre Party. So based on the scenarios that Cesar mentioned, one is fine, the rest are terrible. So we have three scenarios. One is CNE is able to and provide official results on time by the deadline. The other would be Congress doing so and do so. And then the other would be that we don't get the result. Those are the scenarios on the table. Now, the president has provided some relief to the public by saying that she will recognize the results. But the coordinator of the Libre Party and the question to if they would let Giomarda sign or no, they said no, no. It would if Marlon would be able to sign in, and so in a WhatsApp thing, they said no. Marlon is a party soldier, and so that's Plan A. Marlon could refuse to sign off on the official results, or maybe he will. But after the president made her statement, just a few hours later, Luis Redondo uh, came out with his own statement. So you have the Libre Party, the government. The problem here is that Libre is truly in an open conflict with reality. And they've sent signals that they are willing to absorb this. And the OAS, a meeting of the permanent council, it came to fight with everyone. He had a clear version of what had happened in the elections, the consensus, and the electoral observation mission said that there were no indications of fraud in terms of the results or the process, particularly the process. And the Libre was not respecting the process. So Libre and wanting to hold on tightly to this. And this is damaging the country and the party. And Libre is getting off track, and nobody is going to trust in Libre because their proposal is not attractive. The way they govern, the way they engage in politics, the way they communicate with the people. So I think the most desirable scenario is that an agreement is reached. And as Sandra said, that there's a political agreement, even if the members of the council do that, whether it's through some sort of official statement or kick the can down the road to the Congress. Sandra and Jennifer, I want to ask you both the same question. As we look forward, are there lessons here for the country and even the rest of the region? We know that Honduras has very unique elections. You have a single round. We saw elections in Chile. The results of the second round were clear. In just a few hours, we knew who had won. And President Boric called the president-elect. My question to you then is, what reforms should be implemented to avoid similar situations in the future? And what lessons are there to be learned and for the rest of the region and for the country as we look forward to future elections? So let's start with you, Jennifer. I'm not sure if I'm the right one to answer. However, several things come to mind. Not just about a second round. The the differences are very minimal in the voting, so I'm not sure another round would happen. I think there needs to be better control or better guarantees for the public. We need a well-informed citizenry. Here, I wanted to talk about the misuse or abuse of state media. That also really does have an impact. It's the use of public resources, it's money, and it trying to change public opinion. And the government was doing large campaigns paid in state media. They paid it for advertising on big uh, state media TV channels, trying to sow distrust in the elections. They were attacking civil society, attacking journalists. We had the military newspaper attacking journalists who questioned the military's role in the primary elections. So there needs to be better oversight and better oversight of state media and what's spent on campaigns because it generates uncertainty and mistrust. In this matter of the kind of original sin of the parties was the distribution of power, and that people are there organizing the elections, and it is so expensive, and it's about 43 lempiras per vote in the election. So that's very expensive. So to have people who are not experts or to have people who are members of the parties, it's really terrible. I think we need deep overhaul of the electoral bodies, not just to change in who's there, but the way they operate so that this does not happen again. So boycotts of one party of the other or among parties so that that does not ultimately undermine the elections. And I do believe that there need to be investigations surrounding election-related crimes. People are talking about fraud. Everyone's accusing the other of committing electoral fraud, but we have no guarantees after we get past the post-election crisis of who who did in fact commit election-related crimes. There needs to be follow-up. I think journalists have learned the lessons and the people have learned the lessons that after elections and once we get past this crisis, what do you do about election related crimes? Were who was conspiring to ensure that the elections became problematic? And here we're talking about what happened over the past 3 weeks, but this is a broader conversation about how these past weeks will impact the ability for the next administration to govern. Okay, Sandra, lessons learned. What do you think are the lessons learned for future elections in Honduras? Thank you, Maria Fernanda. I agree with what Jennifer said. The main challenge is, of course, in election reforms. We have to depoliticize election organs, and the OAS's EOM stated to the Permanent Council in this meeting this week, they saw that there was no bad intent or any election fraud as now, but they did see some technical shortcomings and some policy related shortcomings. These policies, and Hector already mentioned them, that the representatives of CNE are representatives of their parties before being public servants. And this reached its peak where the representative of the governing party openly stated that he would not sign off on the results. The CNE, it cannot be politicized. It has to be professional. It cannot rely on outsourcing like the trip. The major problem here in uh, the preliminary broadcast system failed. The ruling party said there were issues with the company, but there was a unanimous decision to hand things over to a single company. But at the end of the day, this became one of the most serious problems. So the CNE needs to be more resilient vis-a-vis any failures or problems with contracted services. So we have to depoliticize the body. It has to become more resilient because you cannot put everything in the hands of a private company. That is the root of many problems, and it also undermined some of the trust, as Hector stated. It's all of these technical issues, and we need more responsible behavior. Hector, let me ask you the last question for this afternoon's event. What Jennifer was talking about was the role of civil society, and Sandra was alluding to what happened in the hours after the polls closed with TREP and the dissemination of preliminary results. And CNA has been one of the most visible civil society actors, and you had your own platform for sharing results, and you were using CNE data. So what role has CNA and civil society more broadly played? What would your message be as the concluding message for this. Well, what you were saying is that we were trying to play a role that in any way sought to replace the official electoral body or any characterizations of CNA. We were there to contribute to the health of the process. We, as civil society, endeavored to be citizen observers. So it was to follow the public acts of CNE before and on election day. We organized them. We provided them with a display so that they were accessible to people. We tried to make it more understandable in an environment of a lack of information and of disinformation. What we wanted to do was close some of these gaps so that people had reliable information. And then we had what we call democratic pedagogy. We've developed different deliverables in the pre-election, during the elections, and post-election phases. We shared information about how the elections work, how the process works, what happens when there are inconsistencies, what are the legal calendars for this, for recounts. What was happening to prevent people from falling into extremist rhetoric. We were able to consider this to be an early warning, provide some context. We had pointed out some risks in advance, documented some of the failures or shortcomings, and tried to be very pro-positive about this in order to be able to ensure that things proceeded legally, transparently, and that we explained what exactly the roles of the different entities were. So as civil society, we have sought not to be political mediators or a mediator between political actors and in the citizenship, but given the polarization, what we sought to do was reach out to the citizenry to ensure that they understand what's been happening so that they can understand extremist discourse. And we tried to frame the debate within rules, processes, and evidence. We want to be sort of a democratic cushion more than being an arbiter. CNE as the institution, we want to make sure that they are complying with the law, that they guarantee that they are working transparently with the work they've already done and what still needs to be done, that they be very clear in their explanations of what they're doing, and based on laws and evidence and sometimes in the narrative, and that grows proportionally in the political actors. It's very important to remind them that there are rules of the game and that any challenges have to go through the proper legal channels and not be litigated in social media. But it's also important to provide verifiable data, make sure that there's civic oversight, and to always demand that our will be respected in these elections where they're so that they are credible. As civil society, we are there in a complementary fashion, particularly when we see some of the cracks in our democracy. We want to make sure that there's understanding. Thank you, Cesar. In the information, disinformation, surrounding election processes is very important. With that, I would like to thank all of our panelists for this conversation. I don't think it should end here. Thank you for your time. In just a few days before Christmas, in this environment, we'll the public to continue to follow us. We will continue to keep our eye on the Honduran elections. Thank you very much.